Why does maths homework do this to our evenings? It's after school. Your child comes home tired. Somewhere between dinner and bedtime, there's maths homework to do. And something shifts. A heaviness settles. Sometimes there are tears before you've even opened the book. You're walking on eggshells and you're not entirely sure how you got here. In this episode, I want to explain what's actually happening for your child and for you. Because once you understand it, homework stops feeling like a battle and starts feeling like something you can actually navigate. Welcome to Safety in Numbers, a podcast for parents of children who struggle with maths, including those with dyscalculia or a specific learning difficulty in maths. In each episode, we explore what might be happening when maths feels difficult and what parents can do to better understand and support their child. If homework for maths has become one of the most stressful parts of your family's week, you're not alone, not even slightly. It's one of the most consistent things parents tell me across families and schools and ages, that the homework battle is exhausting, demoralizing, and often feels wildly out of proportion to what's actually being asked. A page of maths that should take 20 minutes, but somehow it turns into an hour. There are tears and frustration on both sides. There's the child who was fine 10 minutes ago, who is now in pieces, and a parent trying very hard to stay calm, running out of ways to show their child how to do it. And then they feel that guilt afterwards. Did I handle that well? Did I make things harder than they needed to be? In this episode, I want to help you to understand why this happens. Not in a vague, reassuring way, but by explaining what maths homework is actually asking of a child with a specific learning difficulty in maths or dyscalculia. What it feels like from inside that child's experience and what you can really do differently that can help. This isn't a parenting problem, and it isn't about effort, attitude, or who your child is as a person. Instead, it's a very understandable collision between what homework demands and what your child's brain can manage at that point in the day. Before we look at why this becomes so hard, it helps to start with what the homework experience often actually feels like. For many families, the battle doesn't start when the book opens. It actually starts much earlier. Some children begin to show signs of distress on the way home from school as soon as they remember that there's maths homework that evening. The dread is anticipatory. It kicks in even before the work has begun. When homework does start, the child sitting at the table often doesn't feel like the child you know. They become easily distracted by small things, or they say they can't do it before they've even really tried. They might cry or go quiet or get angry or do anything they can to put it off or get out of it in ways that feel out of proportion to what's happening. You try to help. Sometimes that helps for a moment, but then they can't seem to hold on to the explanation you've just given them. You repeat it, they nod, and then they look at the next question, and it's as if you never spoke. They don't engage with the maths, they just try to do maths. You start to feel frustrated, not necessarily because you're an impatient parent, but because you've explained the same thing 4 times and you can't understand why they're not getting it. Then you feel frustrated. And then you feel guilty for being frustrated. Your child picks up on your frustration, becomes more distressed, and the whole thing spirals. I remember a parent saying to me, he seemed a very calm, measured father, that he'd started to dread Tuesday evenings. Tuesdays were maths homework nights. He loved his daughter deeply, of course, but from Tuesday afternoon onwards, he began to feel a low-level dread building because he knew what was coming. He felt awful for admitting it. Now, it didn't reflect badly on him as a parent. It reflected the reality of what homework had become in their house and how much he kept showing up for it anyway. If any of that sounds familiar, it's because this pattern is far more common than a lot of families realize. It isn't a sign that something is going wrong in your house. It's a sign that something specific is happening in those homework moments. To understand why homework situations become so intense, we need to look at what your child is already carrying with them before they actually sit down at the table. School is tiring for most children, but for a child with a specific learning difficulty in maths or dyscalculia, school involves a particular kind of mental, cognitive effort that goes beyond ordinary tiredness. We talked earlier in the series about working memory. For a child whose working memory is under strain, every maths lesson requires significantly more effort than it does for most of their peers. While other children are learning the maths, your child is also managing that extra cognitive load of holding information on a smaller set of mental post-its, working out facts every time that others retrieve automatically, and processing maths language that doesn't attach easily to meaning. And that extra effort doesn't stop when the maths lesson ends. Children carry it into other parts of the day, into lessons that indirectly involve numbers, into instructions they have to hold in their mind, into transitions between lessons and classes, and into keeping themselves regulated. By the time they get home, your child may look fine, but those mental resources required for doing maths-related things have been building under pressure all day. And then the homework arrives. Homework asks for exactly those resources to be utilized again at precisely the moment that they're most limited. It's like being asked to run a second marathon immediately after finishing a first one. The willingness might be there, the effort might be genuine, but the resources are depleted. I've spoken to children about what this feels like, and what they describe is strikingly consistent. They talk about their brain feeling full. An 11-year-old described it to me as trying to pour water into a cup that was already overflowing. They weren't being dramatic. That's actually a really accurate description of cognitive or mental overload. There's something else going on too. Doing maths at home with a parent adds pressures that don't exist in the classroom. At school, your child has cover. They're one of many, and if they don't understand, they can look around, copy a step. They can just buy themselves a moment. The social structure of the classroom actually softens the intensity of what they are feeling when they are doing maths. At home, there is no cover. It's just you and your child. You love each other, which paradoxically makes things harder, because your child is acutely aware of your reactions. They notice the sigh, the repetition, the slight shift in your voice when you've explained something 3 times, and they care deeply about what you think of them. That raises the emotional stakes. Small moments land harder, and difficulties that might pass quickly at school can escalate at home. Many parents also feel uncertain about whether they should be helping at all. They worry their explanation might be different from the teacher's and make things worse. Now, that's a reasonable concern. Maths is taught in specific ways, and conflicting explanations can add confusion. A brief conversation with school about methods can help, not because your instinct to help is wrong, but because helping by using the same approaches is important. I'll publish another episode on this aspect, as it's easier said than done. Then there's the parent-child relationship itself. You have history. When your child struggles, you feel it. When they cry, you want to fix it. That emotional responsiveness, which is a strength, can also raise the temperature in the room, taking up even more of your child's already depleted working memory. None of this is anyone's fault. It's just the reality of the situation. I want to talk about one moment parents describe to me over and over. Your child looks at the homework, and sometimes before they've even read the question, they say, "I can't do it." The instinctive response is, "You haven't even tried." Now, that's understandable, but for a child with a history of maths difficulty, this moment means something different. Maths doesn't feel neutral. It feels threatening, not consciously, not dramatically, but at a physiological level. The brain has learned through repeated experience that maths means confusion, effort without payoff, feeling less capable than others, being caught out, and having mistakes noticed more than their successes. All of this creates a sense of exposure for them that feels uncomfortable or unsafe. Over time, that experience creates an alarm response. When maths appears, the book, the worksheet, even the mention of homework, the alarm sounds. The brain moves into protective mode. When that happens, working memory is compromised even further. Thinking becomes harder. The child says, "I can't do it," not as defiance, not as manipulation, but as an accurate report of what their brain is experiencing in that moment. This is what maths anxiety often looks like in practice. I worked with a 10-year-old who described seeing her homework as a wall. "It's just there," she said. "I can't even think about what's on the other side." That wall wasn't her laziness. It was her nervous system responding to something it had learned to protect against, because previous experience had taught her that in this situation it wasn't safe. Pushing against that wall doesn't make it smaller, but changing the conditions does. So what helps? I want to offer you a few ways of thinking differently about homework that follow directly from everything we've just talked about. The first is timing. If your child's cognitive resources are most depleted straight after school, that is usually the worst time to ask them to do maths homework, even if it's the most convenient time for you. From your child's point of view, they're being asked to draw again on the same mental resources that have already been under pressure all day. The capacity maths relies on, the working memory, the effortful thinking, their emotional regulation, is all at its lowest. So what looks like avoidance or resistance is often just exhaustion. For some children, a period of proper downtime first makes a real difference. Not screen switching or half distraction, but time when nothing is being asked of them. For others, a later window in the evening works better once they feel more settled again. And for some families, maths homework works best in the morning when the brain is fresher and the day hasn't yet taken its toll. There isn't a single right answer here, which is why it's worth experimenting with. You're not looking for the ideal slot, just a moment when your child's brain is a little more available than it would be straight after school. And in many cases, this is also worth talking about with school, not as an excuse, not as a refusal, but as information. Letting teachers know when homework is being attempted and what you're seeing helps shift the conversation away from compliance towards what actually supports learning. Timing doesn't fix everything, but it can lower the temperature enough for homework to stop feeling like an immediate battle, and that in itself is a win. Second, reduce the emotional temperature before you start. By the time homework appears, many children are already braced. Their body is expecting difficulty, exposure, and effort before a single question has been read. If homework begins at that emotional pitch, even small demands can tip things over really quickly. One way to change that is to begin with something easy, something your child already knows how to do, something they feel competent doing. This isn't about tricking them or lowering expectations. It's about giving their nervous system a different starting point. Spending a short time on something your child can already do is enough. The goal isn't to get through work, it's to shift how the work is being approached. When a child starts with success, even a small one, the sense of threat softens. They're more likely to remain engaged because they're no longer working from a place of immediate defense. This can look really simple. A couple of fluency questions your child finds manageable. Revisiting something that feels familiar before moving on. Or even starting with organization, setting things up, getting the book out, reading the instructions together. So the jump into that cognitive effort isn't abrupt. What matters is the message their brain is receiving at the start. This is manageable. That sense of capability creates more space for thinking than any explanation you can give mid-meltdown. Reducing the emotional temperature doesn't guarantee that homework will be smooth, but it lowers the likelihood of an immediate spiral. And that can make the difference between work that feels tolerable and work that feels impossible. Third, change your role. When maths homework becomes difficult, many parents feel they need to step in as the teacher. You sit opposite, you lean in, you explain, you demonstrate, you correct. That reaction is completely understandable. You're trying to help your child get through something that's clearly hard. But for children who already associate maths with pressure and exposure, that shift can make things more intense rather than easier. Becoming the teacher places your child in the position of being observed. It raises the sense that they're being watched, evaluated, or corrected by someone whose opinion matters enormously to them. Even very subtle changes in posture, tone, or pace can increase the emotional load without either of you quite realizing it. Changing your role doesn't mean withdrawing support. It means shifting how that support is offered. Instead of sitting opposite, try sitting alongside. Instead of saying, "Watch me show you," try, "Let's look at this together." Those small changes reduce the sense of performance and replace it with shared attention. Your child is no longer doing maths for you or in front of you. They're doing it with you nearby. Your presence becomes stabilizing rather than directive. Sometimes that means saying less. Sometimes it means leaving more space between steps. And sometimes it means simply being there, calm and available, and not pushing the thinking along faster than your child's brain can manage at that moment. This shift doesn't happen overnight, particularly if you've both been used to being in very different roles around homework, and it doesn't suddenly make maths easy. But it can lower the pressure enough for thinking to keep going instead of shutting down. And for many children, that's the difference between homework that escalates quickly and homework that feels tolerable, even when it's still hard. Fourth, give yourselves permission to stop. Not to give up, to stop. If after 10 or 15 minutes it's clear that the mental resources are gone, carrying on isn't creating learning, it's creating distress. At that point, your child isn't practicing maths, they're practicing being overwhelmed. From the outside, stopping can feel like failure. It can feel as though you're sending the message that homework doesn't matter or that pushing through isn't important. But in reality, continuing when the brain is overloaded often teaches the opposite of what you want it to do. It reinforces the idea that maths means pressure, tears, and shame, rather than effort leading to understanding. Stopping is not a soft option. It is a boundary. It says we're paying attention to what's possible right now. It says your well-being matters more than this page of homework. And it says that maths is something that can be returned to under better conditions, rather than something that has to be survived at any cost. In those situations, writing a brief note to the teacher explaining what happened is a valid response, not as an excuse, not as a refusal, but again as information. We tried. The mental resources ran out. This is what it looked like. That kind of honesty helps keep homework connected to learning rather than turning it into a nightly test of endurance for everyone involved. And finally, separate homework from learning. Homework is often set as practice at the end of a long day. It's asking children to rehearse ideas they're assumed to have already understood at a moment when cognitive and emotional resources are already stretched. For many children with a specific difficulty in maths, expecting new understanding to develop in that moment is unrealistic and sometimes counterproductive. So what does that mean in practice? It means homework doesn't have to do all of the work of moving maths forward. It doesn't need to be the place where understanding, confidence, and progress all have to happen at once. Recognizing the limits of homework allows it to stay smaller and more contained, emotionally as well as academically. It reduces the sense that every evening matters and helps prevent homework from becoming another site of pressure, confusion, and distress. And that's important because it protects the relationship around maths, even when the maths itself still feels hard. I want to leave you with this. If homework has become something you dread, that isn't evidence that you or your child are doing something wrong. It's evidence that your child has a real difficulty that isn't being adequately supported, and that you're absorbing the impact of that evening after evening on your own. Understanding what's actually happening changes how you interpret what you're seeing. It doesn't fix everything overnight, but it gives you a different place to stand. In the show notes, you'll find a short companion guide for this episode, which pulls together the key ideas we've covered. What's driving the homework battle, what your child is carrying into those moments, and why certain shifts can ease the pressure. It's there if it would be helpful to have something to come back to or to share with school. And in the next episode, we'll look at place value, one of the most persistent sources of confusion for children with dyscalculia and SPLD in maths. Thank you for listening. I'll see you next time. If you found this episode helpful, please do share it with another parent who might need it. And if you'd like to make sure you don't miss future episodes, you can subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts or follow the Safety in Numbers YouTube channel. Until next time, thank you for listening.